Longino talks about theory choice and feminist values in theory choice, and a few of you had some questions about that. So one of you asked, is there any relation between Longino's list of ways by which one should decide which theory one should endorse and Zagzebski's virtue epistemology? And I think this is interesting because the ways you often are said to decide between theories, these are often called theoretical virtues of theories. Zagzebski, on the other hand, as we saw, is talking about the virtues of people as believers. Nonetheless, I think this is an interesting question. I think there is some relationship. You might think a virtuous subject, a virtuous believer, is someone who values the sort of theoretical virtues that Longino might be talking about when inquiring. So we might think when we're doing inquiry, we should inquire and make choices about which theories to accept and reject based on some of the theoretical virtues that Longino talks about, and maybe others. And so a virtuous subject might have the features of taking those virtues seriously, or deferring to those virtues, or thinking those are important virtues. So I think the answer is, yeah, there probably is a connection, though making it precise, I think, is challenging. Another question asks, says the following: in philosophy and physics and business and life, we often look for simple principles that apply to everything. It said that any idiot can confuse an issue, but it takes a genius to simplify it. Would Longino disagree with this wisdom in her complexity of relationships criteria for evaluating theories? If she would, can we come to broad general truths about the world on her account, or must we have detailed knowledge of specific contexts in order to understand anything? This is a good question. I find this complexity of relationships feature that she thinks is important in theory choice a bit confusing myself. Now, I think she is thinking that this tendency we have, it's a very strong tendency in philosophy and science to want to try to simplify, and that's what we should be doing. I think she does think that's often a mistake, that what we should instead realize is that things are vastly interconnected in complex ways. And so some sciences are good at this. Maybe ecology is a good sort of example of a science that does this, where you sort of say, well, when we introduce wolves back into a habitat, it changes the behaviors of the animals that wolves prey on, and this changes the behavior. This changes where they graze, and then there might be more trees growing where they used to graze, and this might help different sorts of other animals get the nutrients they need, and maybe the river runs differently, because there's all these sorts of complex issues. When we think about ecology, that's sort of science that tends to think in these complex ways, whereas when we think of things like physics or chemistry, we want to sort of reduce and simplify. And so I do think she thinks there's real value in thinking about the complexity and interrelation between lots of different things. So we should be thinking about that when choosing theories. The second part of this question asked, can we still come to broad general truths about the world? And I think her account doesn't rule out general truths, though they may be more complex and harder to come by, because we really need to understand all the interrelations. It doesn't mean the truths aren't necessarily objectively true or something like that, but it might mean that they're less simplistic and less reduction-y, less trying to reduce more complex phenomena to simpler phenomena. Last question I want to address here. Somebody says, if we start to favor novelty in our scientific theories, as Longino says we should, at what point do we stop? Will we never be satisfied with a theory, no matter how true it is, because there can always be one that is slightly newer? And I think it's true that feminism's nature, she says, is to be an oppositional or critical theory. So novelty might continue to be a good thing. Feminism might never get mainstream status, or it might always be pushing further. And so maybe novelty might always be a virtue, according to feminism. But we must keep in mind that doesn't mean that we just always choose the newest theory. We should be balancing novelty with all these other theoretical virtues that she talks about. And in particular, empirical adequacy is one of those. So would never turn out, we'd hope, that we reject a theory that is empirically adequate, that makes the right empirical predictions, for one that does not but is newer. I don't think that's ever going to be the way those different concerns in theory choice balance out. If we're going to look for newer theories, they're going to have to be at least as empirically adequate as our old ones. I think that's plausibly what Longino would say here.